Younger Australians are copping a raw deal and the tax system needs reform. That was the consensus after 3 days of roundtable talks. Well, how ambitious will the government be in its response? The Treasurer joins us this morning. I'm David Spears. Welcome to Insiders. They came, they talked and they reached quite a bit of consensus. After 3 days of roundtable talks, attendees agreed on the need to urgently cut red tape to speed up home building, and the government is moving on that today. Changes to environment laws and a road user charge are also on the way. But the toughest issue and the most politically fraught was always going to be tax. And on this, an important first step was taken. Agreement was struck on the need to achieve 3 broad goals: giving working Australians a better deal, incentivising business investment and simplifying the tax system. The challenge on tax reform has been set. The ball is now in the government's court.
It's been very good and let us in early.
Business and political leaders have met in Canberra to tackle Australia's biggest economic challenges.
So these 3 days are going to be really important.
A lot of things happening behind closed doors.
From shaking up tax to slashing red tape.
It's about lifting living standards of Australians.
It's taken the government 3 years to acknowledge the problem, 3 months to organise a 3-day discussion.
The Treasurer determined to remove the regulations choking the economy and holding up housing.
We want builders on site building homes for Australians.
We're out here where the boots are, not where the suits are.
We saw some really welcome signs of developing consensus around a number of really important areas.
But the biggest changes were being announced nearby with a drastic shake-up of the NDIS.
8% growth is simply unsustainable in the medium to long term.
Children with mild developmental delay and autism will soon be able to receive support outside of the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
The NDIS model just doesn't suit their needs.
We support in broad measures that bring spending within the NDIS under control.
The disability community is optimistic about today's announcement, but says the devil will be in the detail.
You're going to end up with a generation who are unsupported.
The NDIS was just life-saving.
Another announcement with no details and no certainty.
We heard about the proposed changes from the federal government when the minister made his address yesterday.
Look, I can't sign a blank cheque.
It's got to be done very carefully so that we don't end up leaving people behind.
It's the final day of the Economic Reform Roundtable.
By my count, we're into the 20th hour.
It's absolutely critically important that we address the biggest issue, which is intergenerational inequality. It's just not fair.
That it is getting harder and for younger generations in tax, in other areas.
You do not raise living standards by raising taxes.
There will be outcomes from the roundtable.
I think our tax system is imperfect, and one of its most troubling imperfections is best seen through an intergenerational lens. Thank you.
Well, my guest this morning is Treasurer Jim Chalmers. First, let's check what's making news. In one of the first moves following the roundtable, the government is moving to speed up housing supply. Further changes to the 2,000-page National Construction Code that were due in 2028 will now be paused until 2029, unless they relate to safety and quality. And during that time, the code will be made easier for tradies to navigate, including through the use of artificial intelligence. Environment Department decisions on more than 26,000 new homes will also be fast-tracked. The Property Council and master builders have welcomed the move. And in the 9 newspapers, parents of children with mild to moderate developmental delays and autism could face thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket costs under planned changes to move them off the NDIS. Psychology, physiotherapy and speech pathology services, which can help children learn to dress themselves, use the toilet and communicate, are currently covered by the NDIS. The government is still working out how alternative supports will work. We're going to start with the roundtable outcomes. The most important was the consensus on broad tax reform goals. Attendees have laid down the gauntlet. How the government responds will define its success this term. Labor wants to give working-age Australians a better deal and it wants to boost productivity. But the broad agreement at this roundtable is unlikely to last once specific tax changes are put forward. The question remains, how much political capital is Anthony Albanese willing to spend? Let's bring in the panel. We're joined this week by Phil Coorey, Jane Norman and Shane Wright. Very good morning to all of you.
David.
We'll get to tax, but there were a bunch of other areas of agreement at the round table, and today we see movement on the housing front. Phil, how significant will these changes be?
Oh, it's part of the solution, but not all of it. We do need to point out that 5 months ago, when the coalition was proposing something very similar, it was Labor bagged it as wanting people to live in shoddy homes and Grenfell Tower type circumstances. So we shouldn't forget that, but. This is a bit different, same but different, and it's just acknowledging, red tape is a huge problem in the housing industry. There's a construction code. This is the main announcement today. That's 2,000 pages long, and it's and piling on regulation after regulation. It's added about 50 to 100 grand to the cost of building a house, as well as the time. Industry's been complaining about it for ages. Coalition tried to do something at the last election, and now Labor's decided they're going to look at it.
Yeah, and Shane, the government points out they're not going as far as a 10-year freeze as was proposed by the coalition, but a bit of time here, and they reckon they'll be able to make it a simpler code for tradies to follow, because at the moment it is diabolical.
Yeah, because one of the ideas is, so if you're a Sparky and you're 10 floors up in an apartment block, you've got an iPad. At the moment, you cannot use the code to see, am I building this correctly? It is absolutely stupid that you've got to that point. So that is one of the, that is something really definable. But we've already seen, there was a big announcement by Murray Watt and Claire O'Neill a couple of weeks ago about a big project for about 2,200 homes near the Queen Vic Market in central Melbourne, where there was state heritage laws which had to be okayed, and then they're having federal laws in the same space, and this is the whole idea of trying to get through getting through projects quicker. But ultimately, it doesn't mean that they'll be built quicker in terms of the productivity around that area.
And productivity is the word, right? Right across the economy, housing's a big problem at the moment. This is about tweaking what dials you can to improve productivity and get homes built faster. When it comes to tax reform, right, it's about trying to find a tax system that can allow a more productive economy as well. But the three outcomes, Jane, let's start with the first of them, giving working-age Australians a better deal, tackling this intergenerational inequity. What are they talking about there?
So, as the roundtable was progressing, there was almost unanimous agreement from the people around that table that there was a huge issue with intergenerational inequity, and this is, as you say, young Australians both locked out of the housing market but also carrying a heavier tax burden than they should. And we had some hints about the government's direction, because Jim Chalmers invited the Grattan Institute's Aruna Sathanapalli to give the keynote speech in the final session on the final day. And she breaks it down as, in very simplistic terms. You can have a 40-year-old living next door to a 70-year-old, and they're both earning $100,000 a year, but the 40-year-old is paying twice as much income tax as the 70-year-old, because, of course, older Australians are able to access more generous super tax breaks, capital gains tax, and have, family trust arrangements. And so the way the income tax system is structured, basically the consensus around the table was that it is unfair for younger Australians. And so the question for the government now is, how do you tackle that? And do you go after the superannuation tax concessions, the housing tax concessions, which is also, there's a fairness question around that, because of course older Australians paid tax through their working lives, were okay with their money being compulsorily put into a super account, knowing that by the time they retired, they would have this generous tax treatment.
That's the difficulty, right?
People that 70-year-old used to pay income tax, don't forget, right? Yeah, and so, look, I think we need to be just a bit cautious here. We need to question here. I mean, the government didn't take any of this to the election, right? When in 2019, when Labor went with a simmer after taxes about trusts and franking credits and all these sorts and super and all these sorts of things. There was no mention of intergenerational equality then. That was to fund a big spending social agenda. So now they're badging it as intergenerational equality, but is it to fund? We know the Prime Minister wants to do a big thing on free or virtually universal childcare, take to the next term. Are they using intergenerational equality to actually
presumably
do something else, or are they actually going to cut income taxes if they're deep?
Well, that's the thing. When we talk about trying to tackle intergenerational inequality, it's somehow reducing that income tax burden.
A reform is two moving parts, minimum. Like you raise one and lower
and look,
another.
You're right to say none of this went to the election, so they've got to weigh this. And this is where Anthony Albanese's caution clearly will come in, that he doesn't want to burn trust. That's his primary objective here. But at the same time, Shane, on the other hand, can we continue with a tax system as it is, that is putting a pretty heavy weight on those younger working age
younger people and companies, like because of the tax rate for companies hasn't changed and companies are not investing. Like remember when this was first announced, Anthony Albanese talked about productivity. Tax is important, and we can reflect on it, but productivity, Gutenberg didn't need a tax break to develop movable print. Like Uncle Wilbur and Uncle Orville didn't go down to Kitty Hawk and said, we'll get a plane up because of the tax system. This is like productivity is driven by tech and technological change. Like we are talking about the budget when we're talking about tax and also, and Phil's right in terms of the services that need to be bought and sold through the tax system. So like this melange of productivity and tax, they are very separate, I think.
So and it sort of bears mentioning too inside the inside the round table there was. We talk about a consensus that the tax system's broken. There's also a fair few people who argue the government's spending too much money too, and there was talks about fiscal guardrails, which is actually just rules about how much you should be spending and stuff like that. So you can't just do one and not the other. You can't just keep spending like Billy-O and then tax to, as Costello said, you keep chasing your spending with taxes, you end up in a bad place pretty quick. So.
And we will come to what they did this week on spending, the NDIS changes and the deeming rate changes for the pension as well. But just on tax, I guess when they're wondering, the government, how far they can go, and the process now will be just the government working this out, and that there's not going to be a tax review on this.
Thank God. Henry cheered, I think, when he heard that.
Yeah. Well, I was told. I spoke to a number of those in the room who agreed. We don't need another.
Make a decision or not.
Government can get on with it. However, the Shadow Treasurer Ted O'Brien does think we need some sort of sweeping tax review.
The entire tax system needs to be reviewed so it can be more efficient. There's just no doubt about that.
Yeah, what's wrong with a review then?
Because we know what to do. I mean, that whole roundtable was a softening up exercise. I mean, there's not one thing was said at that roundtable we didn't already know.
There are no new ideas.
No one expressed a single new thought or an idea at that roundtable, right? It was all about informing the public that there's a problem with this thing called productivity. This is what it is, and we need to do all these sorts of things to fix it. I mean, when John Howard sort of bit the bullet in '98 and said, "Bugger it, I'm going to bring in a GST," he didn't have a roundtable. He just made a decision and argued for it, right? So this is sort of modern politics, I guess. You look like you're building up, and you've got to create an awareness of the problem before you can fix it.
And has this done that? Do you think is the
well?
roundtable?
I think it started. But sorry, Jane.
Oh no, I was just going to say, you know that the Prime Minister is taking a very cautious approach with this. And on day one, when he gave his speech, he laid out a journey. He called it. There are going to be some policies that'll be included in MyEtho in the budget, but others that'll be sort of further down the track. So you can imagine, if you're looking at how the government's tracking now, that they will take possibly a bigger tax reform agenda to the next election. And between now and 2028 is the mission to basically convince Australians of the need to do that. But I think also for the people in the room, there was a sense that for the first time in a long time, we have in Australia a stable and probably a long-term government, and so the opportunities for reform are also there. I think there's a lot of cynicism around it, which is potentially fair given how many summits and reports we've had in the past sort of recommending these changes. But the fact that Labor is on track for a third term does provide some hope that if this truly is the beginning of a process, then they actually have a bit of time to convince Australians and get them on board.
And this actually goes to the Anthony Albanese style of government, which is actually trying to bring people with him. Like, the number of times we heard consensus, like if you had a tax on the word consensus, we'd be in absolutely huge surplus, for instance. But that is
he
the
uses
style
the word journey.
He does, and that's the style of leadership and prime ministership that he has. And in terms of John Howard wasn't fighting Twitter, X, social media, but he'd also had, Ken Asprey had suggested a GST in 1975. That had been an issue for 20 odd years before Howard was able to get through an election with it. And I think we have to look at that and in the terms of how quickly and how Albanese wants to be seen as a Prime Minister.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. Well, time to talk to Treasurer Jim Chalmers, who, as Jane mentioned, chose the head of the Grattan Institute, Aruna Safanapalli, to deliver a keynote address to the roundtable on tax. I spoke to Dr Safanapalli for the podcast this week about what should happen now coming out of the roundtable to tackle this issue of intergenerational inequity. She specifically mentioned retirees enjoying tax-free income from their superannuation.
You can have quite a healthy income in retirement, and that is a fantastic thing, right? That's a really good feature of the superannuation system. But we've got these tax settings that effectively enable people to opt out of paying income tax once they move into the super phase. There's not any clear principled reason for that.
Jim Chalmers, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, David.
So let's start on tax. You want to give working age Australians a fair go. Most would agree with that. But does that mean some tax breaks for retirees will have to go?
Well, first of all, we need to ensure collectively as Australians that the fair go is the defining part of our future and not just the defining part of our past. That's the principle at stake here. Now, we already have superannuation tax changes that we announced a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago. And that's all about trying to deal with some of these issues in the system. When it comes to tax reform more broadly, we haven't changed our tax policies. We didn't ask the roundtable to rewrite our tax policies. We asked them to inform them for the next budget and the coming budgets and beyond that as well. And that's what they did a good job of doing. We need to recognise we have a tax reform agenda already. It's about cutting taxes 2 more times for 14 million Australian workers. It's about introducing a standard deduction. It's about considering road user charging. And it's about making superannuation tax concessions still concessional, but a bit more sustainable as well. And so that's the focus, delivering what we took to the last election. The best way to work out any additional steps beyond that is to do that in the government's usual consultative and considered way, which is what we're doing. But ultimately, decisions on any additional tax reforms will be a matter for the Cabinet and for subsequent budgets.
But on this particular idea, let me ask you, Peter Costello back in 2007 introduced the changes to the superannuation system, tax-free super income in the retirement phase. Is that still justified?
Well, there's another step taken in between that. You're quite right that Treasurer Costello made that change, but another change was made, I think, about 10 years subsequent to that by the Morrison government, or perhaps Scott Morrison as Treasurer, which was the transfer balance cap, which dealt with some of those issues that Treasurer Costello had introduced into the system. I think people have been pretty clear, the change that we are proposing to superannuation. We haven't changed our policy on that. We didn't, at the conclusion of the roundtable, rewrite our policies in those areas. More broadly, intergenerational equity has been a motivation for so much of what we're already doing in tax. Cutting taxes for young workers, whether it's our housing agenda, building more homes to rent, climate change, skills. Intergenerational equity is already a central motivation for the government.
I understand that, but just back to the question, is that mechanism of tax-free income in retirement still justified?
Well, the way that I'm answering your question, David, is to point out that we do think that there are issues in superannuation, and that's why we've proposed to deal with them in the proposal that I put on the table more than 2 years ago. The change that you are alluding to is not something that we've been contemplating. Obviously, people around the room at the Economic Reform Roundtable have got views about that. People have had views before the roundtable. They'll have views after it as well. We have taken, I think, some important steps to make the tax system fairer, primarily when it comes to income taxes, cutting them last year, cutting them next year, cutting them the year after. And I think that establishes our bona fides. We've had real ambition when it comes to tax reform.
Okay, but let me just try one more time.
From budget to budget, we do consider additional steps. Okay. The best way to do that is to do that in a consultative way.
But do retirees still deserve tax-free superannuation income?
They still deserve concessional treatment to encourage people to be in superannuation, and that's not something that we have been proposing to change. You know, even the changes that we have put on the table have still meant that the concessional tax treatment in superannuation is still very, very concessional, but a bit more sustainable. And so I do acknowledge as a principle that we want to make sure there's concessional treatment in super.
But maybe
there's a
not,
whole range
maybe
of
not
views
completely
about how we go about that. I announced my view 2.5 years ago.
Concessional, but perhaps not completely tax-free.
Well, that's not something that we've been proposing to change, David, and I'm running out of ways to tell you the same thing, is that we acknowledge that there are issues in superannuation and tax, and that's why 2.5 years ago I proposed what is a pretty modest change but a meaningful change, which makes the system a bit more sustainable but still maintains an element of concessionality when it comes to tax treatment in super.
Yeah, and just on that legislation that you do have, that you took to the election on the change to superannuation balances over $3 million, when will you legislate that? Is it coming this week?
We're not proposing to introduce it or reintroduce it this week, as you know, and as I've said a couple of times already, we've put it to the Parliament before in the last term. We've had a whole bunch of other priorities queued up for immediately after the election that's just been run and won, and so our focus has been in other areas: cutting student debt, making medicines cheaper.
So when will this come?
Improving quality and compliance in early childhood education. Well, we've still got time, David. It doesn't begin to be calculated till the second half of next year, and so we've got time to reintroduce that. But as I said, it's been in the Parliament before. People know where we're coming from. Our goal here is to continue to make sure that there is concessional tax treatment for superannuation, to make sure that that's a bit more sustainable. That's what drives the policies that we announced all those years ago.
The second tax goal coming out of the roundtable was to incentivise more business investment. The Productivity Commission did put forward ahead of the roundtable a plan on company tax to lower the rate for most firms, introduce a net turnover tax for big firms and an immediate deduction. I'm not sure you've offered a view on this idea from the Productivity Commission. What is it? Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, one of the reasons that I didn't come to a definitive view before the roundtable on this proposal is because I wanted to be respectful of the discussions that we would have there, and that's the approach that I've taken. And similarly, after the roundtable, I think we owe it to people to work through these issues in our usual considered and consultative and methodical way. On the detail of what the Productivity Commission has proposed, we need to remember, first of all, these are draft recommendations. The final report's due at the end of the year. And one of the reasons why I think it's good that this proposal is out there is because Danielle Wood, the PC chair, and her colleagues have tried to incentivise investment in a way that we can afford. And those two goals are very important and they're interrelated. I am open to tax changes which incentivise investment if we can afford to do it. And one of the good things about Danny and her colleagues putting this proposal out before the roundtable is because it puts the onus on people who don't like that particular model but do want to see investment incentivised in a responsible way to come up with alternatives. And so there was a lot of discussion at the roundtable about that, about the draft recommendations that she put forward, and I think that's a really good thing.
The third objective, the final one, was on simplifying the tax system. I just wanted to ask you about the GST because we often hear about the complexity from particularly those in the food industry. Tiramisu is GST free, cheesecake is not. Yogurt is GST free, frozen yogurt is not. Is this something you'll look at?
Oh, look, I can almost hear Shane Wright chuckling on your couch. These have been his sorts of obsessions over a long period of time, and I acknowledge that. Look, we haven't been getting into that layer of detail. Obviously, the questions around the GST and desserts have a long and checkered history in the politics of our country. But in terms of simplification and in terms of small business, there was a really terrific presentation at the roundtable from the Tax Commissioner. And his objective, which I support 100%, is to try and make it easier for businesses of all sizes, but particularly small businesses, to comply with their tax obligations in a quicker, more efficient way. There's a role for technology there. There's a role for something which gets a bit closer to what the tax boffins call real-time tax. And so there was a good discussion about that at the roundtable. If we can get those compliance costs down, if we can make it easier for small businesses in particular to do the right thing in the tax system, that's good for everyone. And so I've got a really open mind to trying to progress that agenda. You're right that there were 3 objectives put forward by the group to guide our thinking on tax reform, and simplicity and sustainability are really, really important. For the reasons you imply in your question, we can do a better job there, and if we can, we will.
How ambitious, Treasurer, do you want to be when it comes to tax reform, and will we see anything further on tax in your next budget?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, there is a lot of policy ambition around the roundtable last week, and there's a lot of policy ambition in the government from the Prime Minister down. And our primary focus is on delivering tax reform in all of those ways we took to the election, as I keep mentioning, income tax cuts, considering road user charging, the standard deduction. These are important features of our existing tax agenda. Now, as I said, I think in the immediate aftermath of the roundtable, I think there are more steps to be taken on tax reform. The Prime Minister and I have both said in our National Press Club contributions that we consider our task to deliver what we took to the election, but also to build on that. We've got some time to do that. The roundtable was never about finalising tax policies. It was about informing tax policies for the next 3 budgets and beyond, and that's the approach I take to it. And at the end of the day, as I've said in lots of different ways over the course of the last week or so, fundamentally this is a decision for Cabinet Ministers to take in the usual way and on the usual timing, which is from budget to budget, when we look at the spending side of the budget and the revenue side of the budget on each occasion.
Just wanted to ask you quickly on the road user charge that's coming. You've got to work out the details with the states and territories. Is there a chance that motorists might have to pay both fuel excise and road user charge, or can you rule that out?
Oh no, our focus in road user charging is on electric vehicles. We're not trying to work out ways to double tax internal combustion engines. We're trying to make sure that people who drive EVs, increasing numbers of people who drive electric vehicles, are making a contribution to the upkeep of the roads that they use. It's fundamentally about making the system a bit fairer. We'll take the time to get it right. The states are putting together an options paper for us to consider at our meeting before long, actually, the 5th of September, and so we'll go through that. The main point of contention at the Reform Roundtable was actually whether a road user charging regime focused on electric vehicles begins with heavy electric vehicles like electric trucks, and there's some kind of sequence after that, or whether we be more ambitious earlier. So we'll work through all of that. I don't want to predetermine the discussions I have with the states or the considerations of our Cabinet, working with Catherine King and Chris Bowen and the Prime Minister and others. But we have made it clear we do think a change is warranted here, and we'll take the time to get it right.
On artificial intelligence, you were happy with the conversation at the roundtable on this. It's essentially a debate around how to get the most out of it, but prevent too much damage coming through this as well. What's your thinking at the end of the roundtable about how best the government should be approaching AI?
Yeah. Well, artificial intelligence will change everything in our work and in our lives more broadly. There's no use pretending otherwise. So our job collectively is to maximise the benefits and minimise the risks. That's the approach that the roundtable was taking. It's certainly the approach that the government is taking as well. And so that obviously applies in areas like regulation. We'll do a gap analysis of regulation to see what's necessary here. But artificial intelligence was really one of the most heartening aspects of the economic reform roundtable discussions, because by sharing people's understandings and priorities and ideas, people got a little bit closer to a shared understanding and some common ground when it comes to artificial intelligence, whether it's skills or regulation or some of the important, difficult, spiky issues in artificial intelligence. So even if only that was achieved in the course of the last week, the roundtable would have been worth it. Artificial intelligence was absolutely central to our discussions because it will be absolutely game-changing in our economy and our society into the future.
On spending, there was support at the roundtable from the likes of Ken Henry, Kerry Schott, Allegra Spender and others for at least some sort of rules to be put into the budget around spending. I know you've delivered 2 surpluses, but spending has been creeping up. Why don't you put some sort of rules around the level of spending?
Well, first of all, there are fiscal rules. That's the first point. Secondly, when we came to office, spending as a share of the economy was almost a third. We got it down to closer to a quarter. I think that's too easily dismissed. There was a view around the table that we should further evolve those fiscal rules that are in the budget. Obviously, I take that kind of feedback seriously, and we have a look at those fiscal rules from time to time. But there's an important political point to be made here, David, as well. Of the dishonest and hypocritical things that our political opponents say about the economy and the budget, 2 things stand out. First of all is their position on tax. They went to the election proposing to increase income taxes on 14 million Australians. Secondly is their position on the fiscal rules. They had fiscal rules which weren't worth the paper that they were written on. They failed every test that they set for themselves. They said there'd be surpluses, there were deficits. They said they would get debt down, it's skyrocketed.
You said there are fiscal rules.
Our approach,
what is the rule on spending?
That's what I'm getting to, David.
And are you going to change it?
Well, our rules are set out in the budget, and they are about banking most of the upward revision to revenue, which we've been doing. They're about improving the budget position over time, which is what we've been doing. You kindly mentioned the 2 surpluses, but also the $100 billion in savings, the $207 billion positive turnaround in the budget, the biggest nominal improvement in a budget in a single term ever. We've got the debt down $177 billion. We're saving $60 billion in debt interest. Now, this is why I mention our opponents compared to our record, David. We have delivered the first surpluses in almost 2 decades. They only delivered deficits. And the difference between us and them is they had fiscal rules that they failed on almost every occasion. We've got fiscal rules in our budget. There is a view about tightening them up around the room in the Economic Reform Roundtable. But what really matters here is the outcomes. And if you think about the outcomes that we've delivered, the budget is in much better nick than it was when we found it. And that's why what our opponents are saying about this is dishonest and hypocritical.
So finally then, Treasurer, on the NDIS, because this move during the week is in part about getting the growth in spending down on the NDIS. The Commonwealth and the states were meant to have finalised agreement on this over the last couple of years. That hasn't happened. The states are wary now of what's going to happen from here. What happens if they say no, or if these negotiations drag out? What's the cost to the states if they don't get on board with what you're calling for?
Well, there are a couple of things about that. I mean, first of all, we have been in discussions with the states, but agreement was struck at the end of 2023 to get the NDIS closer to its original intent, and also to tie that to our discussions about the future of the hospitals deal as well. And so, as always with Commonwealth-state financial relationships, there's a bit of back and forth about how we deliver, but that agreement was struck. And the reason why we need to do this, the reason why it's in everybody's interest, is because just 4 years ago, spending on the NDIS was absolutely out of control. 22% it was growing at. We're getting it down to that 8% target. Getting it to 8% will be a good effort, but not good enough, as Minister Mark Butler has pointed out. So we will continue to work with the states on providing the support that people need and deserve, particularly in this instance when it comes to thriving kids. We've put a couple of $2 billion on the table, and that's because we want to work with the states, not at cross purposes, to make sure we can deliver for people in the NDIS. That means making spending on the NDIS sustainable, and it means providing the kind of support that particularly kids without permanent and significant disability still need, but elsewhere in the system.
So when you say this was linked to hospitals, if they don't come to the party on the NDIS, they won't get what they want on hospital funding.
Well, that's the ongoing discussions that we've been having, whether it's treasurers, health ministers, NDIS ministers, leaders have been having this discussion since the deal was struck. What's the best way to implement 2 deals, not one? They are closely related. There are billions and billions of dollars tied up in them. And so we've been trying to progress both of those deals at once for good reason, because there are swings and roundabouts for both of us.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much, David.
Well, before we go back to the panel, I want to bring in the ABC's Disability Affairs reporter, Naz Campanella, for some analysis on these NDIS changes. Naz, thanks so much for joining us. Look, we just heard the Treasurer there. Obviously, the government confident the states will come on board. But we've seen very little progress over the last 2 years between the states and the feds. Is it clear yet what this Thriving Kids program they've announced during the week will involve and how it will work?
In short, no. All we know is the budget for it, the $2 billion, and the start date, July next year, and that people will start to be diverted onto it in 2027, so the year after it starts. And I think some of the key things that people have pointed out to me that are concerning them are, firstly, the talks over foundational supports. As you've just pointed out, 2 years ago, the NDIS review handed down a recommendation to create that system outside of the scheme, and really people have felt that there has been very little discussion about the design, about the funding, about the implementation, and that negotiations did very much stall on that. And I think what people were thinking this week was really around the idea that we've got this announcement of Thriving Kids, but there will still need to be negotiations, as you've just discussed there. And how are those negotiations going to be any different? The reality is people are saying that the states and territories have to be delivering these services, so they have to sort of come to the table on this. And I think one of the big risks that people have pointed out to me this week, particularly the advocacy groups, is saying, in theory, this is great. In theory, this will, do what the name says, help kids to thrive. But the risk is that if co-design, consultation and discussions aren't had over the next 11 months, which anyone could argue is it's not a huge amount of time, if that all isn't done properly and the right procurement processes aren't done properly in this time, then the scheme will not be as robust as it should. And when people are starting to be diverted, are they going to be going into a system that possibly isn't quite ready for that yet?
And look, we're told by the government that the problem at the moment, obviously the growing cost is a problem for the budget, but the problem is some kids with mild to moderate developmental delays and autism are being over-serviced in the NDIS. Naz, is it clear that's happening? Are some kids being over-serviced, to use Mark Butler's phrase?
Look, I spoke to some advocates this week who said it's much more nuanced than that. They say that there's a little bit being given to a lot of people. So no one's disputing that there are significant numbers of kids on the scheme, but that in actual fact they're getting quite small packages, and the utilisation of those packages or the rate at which they're spending those is in some cases very slow. And that could either be because there are not the services they're approved to be spending that money on in their area, for example, in regional remote communities, or there are long waiting lists. We're talking 6 to 12, possibly even 2 years in some areas for a speech pathologist or an occupational therapist. I think what I'd say is what I've heard loud and clear this week is that everyone knows that this scheme cannot support everyone with disability. 20% of the population, 5.5 million, live with disability, and it's very crystal clear that this scheme cannot support all of them, and that it does need to be brought under control fiscally, but also brought back to its original intent. But everyone agrees on that, and everyone agrees that there needs to be change. I think what the community wants now really is to know what that detail is. And ultimately, families don't care where the support comes from. They just want to know that if and when their children need it, it will be available and it will be accessible.
Naz Campanella, really appreciate your analysis. Thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get back to the panel. We're joined once again by Phil Coorey, Jane Norman and Shane Wright. I want to talk about the NDIS here, and Naz's point that this system cannot support everyone with a disability. What we just heard from the Treasurer, Phil, and you wrote about this on Friday as well, is it clear now the threat to the states is if you don't come to the party with the money and getting this thing up and running, you're going to lose hospital funding?
Yeah, that seems to be the insinuation. I mean, just for the viewers,
backstory.
People actually matter here. Yeah, so in December 23, we had a meeting of the National Cabinet, and at that National Cabinet was decided they had to get these kids with these mild we're not talking severe autism or ADHD, we're talking very mild conditions that were never meant to be treated, and this is one of the huge costs on the NDIS is the state stopped sort of providing services for these kids, so they all flooded onto NDIS, and they are being over-serviced, and that's one of the things. So they decided in December 23, get them off and set up a system of what Naz referred to as foundational supports. And that's like the way they used...
What happened?
Well, they used to be treated by the state through communities or schools or childcare or stuff like that. If a kid was slow to learn to read or
and then a lot
couldn't
of
pronounce his R's or something like that. Yeah, when this all disappeared and everything went on the NDIS, and it's like hitting a walnut with a sledgehammer in terms of the funding that can sometimes go in. So when Butler announced the other day we're moving these kids off the scheme, that was not new. It was just the last year and a half of negotiations had proved fruitless, even though Albanese and Chalmers had put on the table nearly $14 billion in extra hospital funding plus another $11 billion in GST top-up payments. That was the deal. You sign up, you take over these supports, you get that dough. Now, I think what Chalmers is saying there is that the hospital money at least is going to be part of this negotiation. Butler decided to take control of the thing rather than saying we'll try and set up 8 different systems with the states and territories. It's gone nowhere. We'll take the lead. We'll set this thing up, and he's basically put a gun to their head. Yeah,
you don't come to the party, you're going to lose this funding. My understanding is too, the government's not ruling out running this federally. As difficult as that might sound, if the states aren't there providing this service on the ground, they might find another way to do this. But in the meantime, Jane, families are understandably anxious because we have no idea how these services are going to run. They're relying on the NDIS at the moment. And there's an incredibly ambitious timeframe here to have all this in place by July.
Yeah, so basically the government wants this to start in July next year, these Thriving Kids. So Thriving Kids is specifically for kids under 9, and that is half of the new entrants to the NDIS. So you can see that's why the government is targeting kids in the first instance under foundational supports. But they want to start rolling out these services in July next year. We don't know what these services are. And as you say, because the states have withdrawn their own disability funding, they don't really exist. And we don't know how they're actually going to be rolled out in support. So will kids with milder developmental delays be receiving these kind of supports through school, through childcare? It's unclear. And then, of course, the government wants Thriving Kids to be fully rolled out by 2027. But the response from the states was really interesting.
Well,
they were blindsided.
Here was the state's reaction to it.
Like many state and territories, we heard about the proposed changes from the federal government when the minister made his address yesterday.
I can't sign a blank cheque. I'm not going to commit sight unseen.
It's got to be done very carefully so that we don't end up leaving people behind.
So some extreme caution there from the state. So they did not know, apart from Chris Minns, he said that he had some indication. But the first they learned of this new Thriving Kids program, as well as the government's ambition to reduce spending growth even further overall for the NDIS, they learned about it when Mark Butler got up at the National Press Club. So you can see that the minister is taking control of this because he's totally lost patience and wants to take this funding fight out into the open to put a heap of pressure on the states. But ultimately, they need the states in this situation. So they're going to have to actually, somehow bring them on board, and perhaps it is the negotiation of the hospital funding that does ultimately convince the states to put in some cash.
I just want to show you the opposition's reaction on this too. I mean, they broadly support the idea of bringing the cost of the NDIS under control, but here was Susan Lee.
We support in broad measures that bring spending within the NDIS under control, but that isn't a blank cheque for the government.
Yeah, what do you think, Shane? Will they be cooperative or will they score a point where they can?
Well, it's hard to score a point when you had Ted O'Brien this morning saying we've got to bring spending under control, and as Phil has been reporting for some time, just about the growth in the spend of the NDIS and what that's doing to the overall budget. And you're right, trying to get this done in 11 months, plus you just had Jim Chalmers say, look, if we're going to do more tax reform, let's look at the next budget. That's 9 months away. They are 2 really big things moving bits to be getting underway.
Let's just talk about what Jim Chalmers said on tax, because I thought this was interesting. He's certainly not ruling out something in the next budget.
No,
we've been talking about maybe they take something in the next election. Well, it might be sooner than that. And what did you make of the comments on the superannuation tax-free income in retirement and the fate of that now?
Yeah, this goes back to Peter Costello deciding, if you reach 60, well, no tax for you, sorry. If you're going to live for another 30, 40 years, that is just untenable. And that's the problem.
He's still saying it should be concessional.
He did focus much on the concessional side of things, and that's where super is right at the moment. But I'm interested that they have yet to get through the change on the 3 million threshold at this point, and there's no sign yet that that's going to come in. We can wait until it doesn't hit until the second half of next year. You would want to get that nailed down unless you were thinking perhaps we'll go further.
Maybe. But I think just super's such a sensitive topic, and he did mention the transfer balance cap that Morrison brought in. So anything over 1.6 million in your super, you're paid 15% on. I think that's indexed, unlike Jim's other tax. So that's up to about 1.9 now. So it's not right that you don't pay any tax in retirement now.
Unless you're under that.
You do have a certain threshold. That's right. But I think he's very reluctant to go further there. Even the 3 million. Which again is an extra 15% earnings tax on the proportion of a super account over 3 million. That's been very sensitive just because of the signals it sends, especially the refusal to index that cap. I mean, we talk about the young person. We talk about young people. There is one thing young people have got it in spades over old codgers like me, and that's they'll have more super than God by the time they retire. Someone starting work now
a bit different.
Is coming in at 12% on a big salary.
Are you saying God's going to get caught by the 3 million term?
I mean, a lot of Gen Xers and Boomers started life on 3% contributions, right? So. This $3 million might seem it's a lot to ask, but it's not a lot to a 22-year-old.
He's going to be paying all that super. On the GST on your frozen desserts, Shane.
I want to declare I don't eat tiramisu or cheesecake. I come at both of these things as not a vested interest. I'm very impartial.
You haven't lived.
Things some delicacies.
That's right. But no, we talk about the problems in the tax system. Like that costs Coles and Woolies so much every year, and you go, this was a problem.
Nonsensical, some of these.
They are.
And this was at the start. This was right at the start when Costello introduced it. There were problems immediately about definitional issues. Get them sorted.
On the other side of politics, the net zero debate continues in the coalition. They just had.
Why?
Why?
No one cares what you're going to do in 25 years. They really don't.
But they are spending their state conferences very focused on this issue. The WA Liberal Party Conference, the South Australia Liberal Party Conference all passed these motions. We got to dump net zero. The Queensland LNP have been having their convention over the last few days as well, and they've overwhelmingly passed a motion. I think it was 99% was the vote to dump net zero as a target.
Today's vote was a strike. It was a first strike in favour of putting Australians first again.
What net zero has become is about trying to achieve the impossible rather than doing something sensible.
So David Littleproud there saying it's about the achieving the impossible. It's pretty clear where the Nats are heading on this. What does that mean for Susan Lee?
Well, it just makes the whole picture more complex for her because the junior coalition partner clearly wants to tear up this agreement. But just to zoom out a bit, in Australia, the commitment to net zero is symbolic for it translates into I believe in climate change. So if you're tearing up net zero, it immediately sends a message to voters that you don't believe in climate change, and it drags us back into the decade-long climate wars that we've had in Australia, which most people are probably tired of. I know that there are big questions about will we actually reach net zero, the costs involved in that, but if the federal Liberal Party is wanting to replicate Western Australia and South Australia in terms of their Liberal parties there, they've been wiped out. So these are the branches that are voting to scrap net zero. They've been taken over by right-wing elements that don't necessarily represent mainstream Australia. And so these are all the kind of complexities when Susan Lee, decides what the new policy is.
And we had a Resolve poll this week which showed Labor won a record 94 seats at the last election. Based on what we're picking up now, Anthony Albanese would have more than 100 seats. Ted O'Brien would be out of Parliament. The people have moved on, and the coalition is struggling in that case.
It's just a fight they don't need to have amongst themselves. Just let Labor do it. It's got a lot of problems associated with in terms of energy costs and stuff. Don't make it their problem, not yours. I don't see the sense in it politically. I really don't. I mean, as someone said, Labor pretended they backed the stage 3 tax cuts up until about 5 minutes to midnight and then changed. So you can just sort of sit there and wait and wait till your decision matters.
Final one: the relationship between Australia and Israel, certainly at the leadership level, is at a low. Benjamin Netanyahu has branded Anthony Albanese a weak leader. He also took to the airwaves in Australia on Sky News to follow it up.
Well, look, I'm sure he has a reputable record as a public servant. But I think his record is forever tarnished by the weakness that he showed in the face of these Hamas terrorist monsters.
Yeah, Anthony Albanese, for his part, suggested this was similar to the way Netanyahu has reacted to other leaders who have said they'll be recognising a Palestinian state.
I don't take these things personally. I engage with people. Diplomatically, he's had similar things to say about other leaders.
Yeah, government here reckons this is Netanyahu being increasingly isolated on the world stage, feeling the pressure lashing out. Is it at all troubled, Phil, by this sort of stuff?
Oh, you'd rather it didn't happen, but I don't think so. Not politically. I mean, it just, as you said, you've got your two constituencies on this who are just so rock-ribbed in their start, they will never change their minds. And then I think, as the Prime Minister says, you've got the majority in the middle is so upset by this whole business, wants it to stop, is sick of the killing, but they're not, one side or the other.
And we saw the Jewish groups in Australia somewhat divided this week too, Jane, over whether Netanyahu was right to do this.
Yeah, that's been a kind of a fascinating shift with the Jewish diaspora as we head towards the 3rd anniversary of the October 7 attacks. With Benjamin Netanyahu, seemingly we don't know what the end game is. We're nearly 3 years in, and we don't know. Like, there are still hostages. Hamas is still in control of parts of Gaza, and so I think you're seeing the frustrations with Netanyahu play out with the communities around the world. And we've had the Council of Australian Jewry come out this week, urging both Australia and Israel to really dial down the kind of rhetoric that's been used from the largely from the Israeli side. And even the Australian Israel Jewish Affairs Council, I thought was interesting, put out a statement yesterday describing the calls by Smotrich, who has basically said that there is no two-state solution and that Israel is now ensuring there is no Palestinian state. AJAC was describing those comments as ill-advised and unhelpful. And so that's kind of a pretty interesting shift in attitudes towards Netanyahu's conduct, really.
And Netanyahu has such a big political problem at home. 400,000 Israelis protesting last week. If you were to replicate that here, that's more than 1 million Australians out in the street saying, you've done the wrong thing. Like, the internal politics of Israel just are such a key part of where Netanyahu has got himself to.
Yeah, indeed. And you can't see the temperature going down too much in the lead up to that UN General Assembly later next month, where countries like Australia and others will be announcing their plans to recognise a Palestinian state. Our panel, Shane Wright, Jane Norman and Phil Coorey, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with the one and only Fiona Katauskas, cartoonist for Guardian Australia, and a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Mike, and it's lovely to be here.
Well, as soon as you said round table, of course, the cartoonists of Australia naturally went to Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Absolutely, and Glenn Lelever has gone right here. And as soon as I saw this cartoon, I just couldn't...
Wanted to make that... I wanted to break into song.
It inspires it, doesn't it?
With the Knights of the Round Table, we dance whenever we're able. King Albo had Sir Charms-a-Lot here, riding along.
I think this is Canberra-lot over here.
It's Canberra-lot. I love this, Mark Knight, the Knots of the Round Table.
Would it be the Knights who say nay? Yeah, nay? Or
the Knots who say nay. King Alba had here, we're not talking about tax reform.
And we're not cutting spending.
We're not backing down on a 4-day working week.
We're not here, we're working from home.
And we're not hopeful, says business. And the little kicker here.
Yes, very non-productive, yes. We've got lovely Sally McManus here. You know why they had a round table?
Why?
Cuts corners.
That is shocking. I love this Beacon Herbert, who's done AI Tetris. Top tech firms to beat regulation. And we've got artwork.
Truth.
Creativity.
Originality.
Job security.
Human agency.
And competition, as well as IP law.
Trust.
Equal access. Ethics.
Safety.
And skill.
Yes, well, it's all fun and games until someone loses their job.
Wes Mountain has drawn this beautiful Jim Chalmers 3-ring circus.
Yes, he's done a beautiful job here. You know, keeping the rings in the air, keeping the plates up.
The Business Council seems to be the classic, how many people can we fit in this V-Gov?
Yeah, and Sally McManus squeezing out on the other side. Lovely work.
As he wrapped up his attacks on Gaza, Benjamin Netanyahu has fired a broadside at our own Prime Minister. He was being the tough guy.
He certainly was, as we have here. Anthony Albanese is weak when he should be caving to bullying and ignoring starving children like a real man. I don't think old Bibi's on the high moral ground here that he thinks he is.
No. Kathy Wilcox thinks that he should have a good hard look in the mirror here.
Yes, you're a weak politician who betrayed Israel and abandoned the world's Jews. Well, it's pretty amazing how Netanyahu doesn't like a two-state solution, but he's quite happy to pursue a pariah state one. And I don't think he's doing Israel any favours at all.
Yeah, this is a lovely Matt Golding. Send this message to Albo.
And the 100k Australians who walked the bridge too, he's just captured Netanyahu's expression really beautifully. Matt Golding has a really lovely way with a few lines. He can really capture a lot.
Donald Trump likes to think of himself as the ultimate peacemaker, but his meeting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has left many conflicted.
Yeah, it certainly has, and horrified as well.
Lovely Mark Knight. I love the Trump Cup and the Mar-a-Lago Open here, all of which he seems to have won.
Oh yes, of course he won. There's a major breakthrough in the Ukraine war.
Ceasefire? Land swap?
No, Zelensky has put on a suit.
He had to, didn't he?
He had to. Zelensky is playing his strongest suit, but unfortunately this guy here holds all the trump cards.
Did love this Brett Lethbridge.
Yeah.
He's getting his bearings here as Zelensky is explaining things. Just orientate me to where the hell we were talking about here.
Your golf courses here, your dad came from here, and most of your wives came from here.
Beautiful.
Oh, so well, I think this is actually a really perceptive cartoon because Trump sees the whole, like he literally thinks he's the centre of the universe.
Glenn Leliva has got some of the new gold work, which seems to be very Putin-esque.
There is, and it was amazing how he's managed to capture the one person who wasn't there. You know, all the European leaders gathered. When you saw the photo of that room, there were a whole lot of people, and one person was missing, but he's really actually there the whole time. And it's amazing how his eyes follow you around the room.
It would have been hard going back into the Oval Office after the last time.
Yeah, well, at least he had some backup.
It's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week, and I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike, and back to you, David.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Shane.
Back to productivity. Lucy Ellis, former Assistant Governor from the Reserve Bank, who's now the Chief Economist at Westpac. I was talking to her earlier in the week, talking about the Reserve Bank's change in its assumptions on productivity growth. And she made the point, what if we've got this the wrong way around? That the assumption is that low productivity leads to low growth. The bank might be getting to the mind, oh, hold on, low growth equals low productivity, and the Reserve Bank's interest rate settings are having an impact. Maybe in business investment, particularly. Like everyone thinks that setting of monetary policy is all about house.
So bottom line, you're saying the idea is they need to cut rates further.
You run the economy a little bit faster
to get productivity going.
To get productivity going.
Interesting. Yeah. There'd be homeowners out there cheering that, that
Yes.
framing. Jane.
Just before, sorry, I misspoke earlier. I meant to say it's the second anniversary of October 7 attacks, not the third. But to lighten the mood a little bit, we have the Midwinter Ball coming up on Wednesday night. It's the Press Gallery's Night of Nights. But a big part of it, the main part, is that we raised millions of dollars for charities since the ball's inception. And a big part of that is the Polly auction. And so you might see on the bottom of your screen a link at the moment. If you go to galabid.com/Midwinter Ball, you'll see that
What's up for grabs this
year? We
year?
have 7 auction items. The Prime Minister is offering a game of tennis at the Lodge. We have the key economic team of Katie Gallagher and Jim Chalmers offering dinner, but the prize for creativity has to go to the opposition leader Susan Lee, who is offering to fly in her Cessna 2 people to a country pub lunch. So I think there's some pretty fantastic items on offer.
Bid, right?
She's designated flyer.
But anyone can bid, is the
Anyone
point.
can
You
bid.
don't have to be coming to the ball or
Right,
anyone
and
out there
all
watching.
proceeds go to charities.
All
some
for a really good
wonderful
cause. It's raised some terrific amounts of money for some awesome charities over the years, so it'll be a lot of fun. Jane, thanks.
And Susan Lee's flying to Parliament today. She's going to sweep the flagpole like King Kong.
doing a rehearsal.
Albanese will be up in the flag. Mine's very quickly. I'm glad to see the Prime Minister finally discovered the algal bloom in South Australia after months now, and he went there last week. I thought it way too late, but they're finally there, and the federal government's finally taking it seriously. It's getting worse, it's not getting better. The ocean's warming as summer's approaching, and Adelaide's beaches are going to be a catastrophe over summer, so we haven't heard the end of that by a long chalk. And I think the government was remiss in its initial response, but they're finally doing the right thing.
I got there. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, and this is going to be 2 weeks in a row for Ted O'Brien, the Shadow Treasurer had an argument with Jim Chalmers behind closed doors at the roundtable over his approach to the budget during the week. It was hardly a heavyweight bout, but still an excuse for a pretty solid Rocky Balboa impersonation. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
You know, you don't want to hear my Rocky impersonation, I tell you. But
Do it.
Oh, come on, Ted.
Do it.
Adrian! You don't want to...
Mate, you didn't even hesitate.
take. That was brilliant. It was just,
I've been practising it for years. This is my moment on national TV.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.